when I grew up there, it was mostly Cape Verdes, a few other poor folks, but I was mostly a kind of a poorish neighborhood, but it was fun growing up there.
It was a kind of a sharing neighborhood. Everybody shared what they had. You didn't have a lot, but it was what little you did have or what you did have was shared.
If you think about it, that congregation of the area, if you were put in the center of that, would be the African Meeting House. You know, so if you put the African Meeting House as your center point, and you put a circle around it, right? Mm-hmm. How wide it encompasses, that's where a lot of Cape Verdeans or people of color ended up.
We were kind of centered around most of our family. The Korea family was 2 yards away. The Perry house was the same distance. The Stanley house was in between, was one of the yards in between. If you went down the street 4 houses, you would find my mom's aunt, Gigi Campbell. My Aunt Margaret's house was after that. So they were all around. We were pretty much surrounded by Cape Verdean and all family.
The neighborhood that I grew up in was near the what is the Five Corners. I believed back then it was referred to as New Guinea, if I'm correct, a long, long time ago. So it was called West York Street many years ago until the name was changed to just York Street. The Stanley family grew up on 7 West York Street, which was just down the street from the old mill. My grandmother, Edith, was directly across the street, and her sister, Mary, was in the house before my grandmother's up on the right-hand side of the street. So the whole neighborhood was family, and it was, we would sneak off on my mother and run up to the windmill when she was trying to get us to do our chores. Where's this one? Where's that one? Where's Neil? Oh, he's climbing up the pole to the windmill.
Where the Stanleys and the Perrys lived, that was up towards Mill Hill. My grandfather said, yeah, those are the Cape Verdeans who live on the hill. They got the highland. We got the lowland. Where we grew up in Nantucket, it was just a close-knit community of people of color. You always seemed like that's your cousin whether it is or not. Like I couldn't date anybody out here because I didn't know if I was related to them or not.
All the children would gather in my mother's backyard because she had a very large backyard. We would all get together and play games after school and on the weekends. My mom would look out the back door and see about 15 children in the yard and bring out snacks and lemonade and cookies and milk. And
so the house where my mother and her siblings grew up, at 126 Orange Street, that home is still in our family. And it's interesting, I was just there before I came here, and it just amazes me how so many of us fit in that house at one time. There were times in the summer where there would be 15 kids under that roof. And we all had our chores, and we'd pack up our lunch and go to the beach. My grandmother would send us down to the bake shop, the Nantucket Bake Shop, and at that time, in the summertime, there was a minute like that you could only buy 1 loaf at a time. And so 1 loaf of bread, of course, wouldn't go too far for 15 kids trying to make it to the beach. So she would send us in shifts to buy bread. She'd, pull money. I think a loaf of bread then was about 75 cents, and she'd pull the money out of her apron and like, okay, now you go. Okay, when he comes back, then you go. So it took a few trips for us to get enough bread to make sandwiches to go to the beach. We'd all pack up, and we were like a band of gypsies. We brought our towels and our lunches and chairs on our heads, and we would be on the beach at 9 o'clock in the morning when the lifeguard went on duty, and we would swim and catch minnows and all day long.
I used to just run across the street, jump in the water. And when most people had a bike when they were little, I had a rowboat. My father had given me a rowboat. I used to row all over the place. Oh, we would go, my father would take me to the boatyard down the end of where the beach is on Francis Street, and we would go dig for little necks. I was about probably 5 or 6. I used to call them turtlenecks.
My sister Kim, and my cousin Tommy, we had gone to the beach, Washington Street Beach. We were there collecting shells, and so I came home and promptly began to paint them. Sat them on a tray in the edge of my driveway, and I'm asking people as they walk up and down the street, "Excuse me, would you like to buy a shell?" Everybody passed me by except for this one gentleman. This one gentleman had a camera around his neck. He approached me and he said, "I don't think I want to buy a shell, but I would love to take your picture." And he says, "Is your mom home?" And I said, "Yes." He goes, "Well, would you mind getting her so I could speak to her?" I said, "Yes." So my mother came out and they had this long discussion. Later to find out, this gentleman's name was Jim Stansfield, and he was a photographer for the National Geographic. And he said, "I'm going to take your picture now." And my mother gave permission. And he took myself, my sister, and my cousin Tommy, the field directly across the street, which was right behind my grandmother's house. And he took pictures, about 1 million pictures, but chose one that appeared in the June 1970 edition of the National Geographic. And I believe the article was called "Life's Tempo on Nantucket." And you can see a 6-year-old Claudia in that photo.
We learned early that wherever you were, somebody would see you no matter what you were doing, and it would get back to home. So that gave some of us the incentive to not be bad when we were away from home.
The rule was, if it was 9 o'clock and that church bell rang, you better be home by then.
Lot of community there. People always looking out for each other, doing everything for each other. Whether it was watching kids, cooking, helping out, anything around the neighborhood, all you had to do was ask and they'd be there.
My father's philosophy was always be good to people, because you never know, one day my children may be somewhere and someone will open the door to them if they're in need.
I mean, those are the things I miss the most. That, like, I'm even sure my son, I have a son and a daughter, know all their cousins to this day, and that's something that it saddens me. You know, we talk about the Cape Verdean heritage, which is lost, and I think that as I look upon it right now, being a part of the community and the things I do with the Boys and Girls Club or working in the school, I see a lot of the Latin community who's come in. I see what they have in their community, what I used to have when I was growing up. You know what I mean?